Hey, fellow patriots, this is Kelly Jackson with TruthWire News, your source for the most reliable and factual news and analysis for Tennessee and beyond. I am very blessed to be involved in a robust grassroots movement here in Middle Tennessee because I have some of the most brilliant and well-articulated friends who are experts on all kinds of topics that really, really matter, including finance. Today, I am joined by my friend, the finance and specifically Bitcoin expert, Dave Birnbaum. Hi, Dave, and thank you so much for being here with me today. How are you?
Great, Kelly. Thank you for having me on. This is going to be fun.
Sure. So, with only a week remaining until the election, many are wondering how the results will impact our financial landscape, especially with Bitcoin's future potentially hanging in the balance. A little of your background, Dave, for those who aren't familiar. Dave is an expert in cryptocurrency and VP of product at Coinbits app. It's a platform that simplifies Bitcoin investments. Dave's expertise has been featured, and let me list these off, in major outlets like the New York Times, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and more. So he's no slouch. Dave's insights into Bitcoin trajectory in the US, especially with shifting political sentiments, make him the perfect person to help us understand where Bitcoin and our economy may be headed post-election, especially if there is a Trump victory. So let's just jump, right in.
Sure.
My first question is, let's start with recent reports suggesting Donald Trump's stance on Bitcoin has softened. If his view truly evolved to consider Bitcoin money, what would this mean for crypto regulation in the United States?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for that interview, Kelly. Or that introduction. I think so. Just to kind of back up and explain kind of how we got here, I think it's
Okay.
important to just kind of go back and talk a little bit about crypto and Bitcoin, what the difference is, and
Yeah.
then how different administrations have treated it. Most importantly, Biden, Harris,
Yeah.
um, and before that, Trump. So Bitcoin is a bearer asset, meaning that it's nobody's liability. There's no management team in charge of Bitcoin. There's no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no board of directors. There's no marketing team.
Yeah.
There's nobody promoting it except for the people who organically understand it and understand that it has the power to help people who are financially disadvantaged
Yeah.
or somehow excluded from the system that we have today, which is very sort of driven by crony capitalism and crony
Mm-hmm.
finance, right? So it offers that alternative. Crypto is, derivative technologies based on the underlying ideas in Bitcoin to build certain coins, like new coins, new tokens. Those are companies. They have boards of directors. They have investors. They have a management team. And so, not to say that those projects are completely valueless, but those projects are very much in line with sort of a typical investment that you would make
Yeah.
in a stock, right?
Right.
Or something like this. Bitcoin is maybe more relatable to something like gold or real estate, where if you have gold. You don't need to, and there's no counterparty there, right?
Right.
It's just metal. It's in your hand,
Right.
and if you have it, you can sell it. Other people will recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
You can trade with it. Real estate, if you control a certain amount of land, now that's a little bit different because there's like property taxes and
Right.
this type of thing, but it's still sort of more closer to like a bearer asset. Like I have land, it has inherent
Yeah.
qualities that I could use as a store of value or as money. So Bitcoin's like that. So that's why we think about it as sort of this very important evolution. It's not just a new investment that
Right.
is sort of has upside that you could like sell later
Mm-hmm.
for a profit. Most
Yeah.
people who I wouldn't say most people, but there's a significant number of people who are coming around to this idea that you do not sell Bitcoin because we're moving into a world where the value of a digital bearer asset that is you can transmit anywhere in the world, you can
Right.
carry it in your head across borders if you ever have to like move to another country.
Right.
You can even take out loans against it, which we'll get into later, but that's like an
Right.
emerging use case. There's really no reason that you would ever want to sell it per se. So we're transitioning, I believe, and this isn't maybe the mainstream view of economists and financial people, but it is the main, it's like catching on among people who understand Austrian economics. And when they look at the debt load of the United States and the dollar, they're beginning to understand that Bitcoin offers sort of an alternative to a decline in US power based on the decline of the dollar, right?
Yeah.
We all know the problems with debt in the United States.
Yeah.
And frankly, the story of debt in the United States is so long. Back in the 80s and in the 90s, there were people back then saying this is unsustainable. Like
Yeah.
we can't continue to rack up our debt like this, and we're going to have to pay the piper eventually, right?
Right.
And we didn't. We didn't
No.
have to pay the piper. We keep spending money, and we
Right.
keep and so now it's gone on for so
So
long,
long.
40 plus years, 50 years,
Mm-hmm.
that there is a new uh, theory of economics that has developed called modern monetary theory, which says, well, look, we're looking at the empirical evidence that debt doesn't matter for prosperity.
Okay.
And so maybe we should build an economic theory around that. And so that's what they've done.
Interesting.
So there's now sort of this faction of, I guess, heterodox economists that
Yeah.
believe modern monetary theory, which is that debt doesn't matter. And then there is on the other side of that, the Austrian economists who would say it absolutely does matter. You're building a house of cards, you're building a Jenga
Right.
tower higher and higher and higher and higher, and it becomes less and less stable. And just because you haven't seen it collapse doesn't mean it won't.
Right.
Life is long. Like 50 years is a blip. Like if you're
Wow.
talking about like the collapse of a currency, and we've seen this in Roman Empire, many
Yeah.
many many countries before. So that's kind of where we are, where people who study economics from sort of a sound money perspective are looking at the situation saying, this is not sustainable and it will come crashing down.
Yes.
And then the question is like, what do we do about that? Right. And so, and what are and what are the political implications of that, which we'll get into the Harris and Trump comparison. But what do you do to fix this problem? And if it's not fixable, is it truly the end of American power and American values, constitutionalism? Like, if we were to undergo some kind of financial cataclysm where the dollar is no longer serving as the store of value used around the world by other
World.
central banks and other companies, wealthy people, institutions, if that were to happen, then what does that mean for American society and American power and international relations? Now that's really scary. And so people, revert to this idea, well, if the dollar is not sound money and the dollar system may be coming to an end, then how do we replace that with something that is sound money? And so really the two options you have, I suppose, are gold and Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a believer that gold can't solve that problem. It plays a role, but it ultimately has qualities that make it unsuitable to a globally connected digital economy, and that Bitcoin can serve that role. So Bitcoin can play a role in sort of preserving American values. It used to be that the US dollar was linked to US power in the minds of really any right-thinking person. You would never want to give up the power of the US dollar if you cared about the United States and its position in the world.
Yeah.
And that's where Trump was
Right.
not so long ago. So, like during his first term, he made several statements that sort of indicated that he was not a fan of Bitcoin or crypto. And the reason was because he said it very clearly. He's just
Hmm.
like, the dollar is the foundation of American power. Like, I want there to be a strong dollar. I'm going to defend the dollar. And, there's kind of two parts to that. One is he's saying we can't give up on this thing so
Right.
easily because it's very important. And number two, if there is something threatening it, like Bitcoin, which offers sort of an
Yeah.
alternative to base money, then I'm going to, do what I can to prevent that from
Yeah.
undermining it.
Right.
And so he said explicitly back then, Bitcoin is not Bitcoin, which is not money, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah,
Right.
in this famous tweet. And, for me, that at the time, I was pretty disappointed in that because
Yeah.
I believe that he could use Bitcoin as a way of achieving his political goals.
Right.
Um, so that happened. Fast forward, and Obama had attacked Bitcoin and crypto in sort of a limited way, which I think we don't need to get into very explicitly here. But he did use the power of the state to attack Bitcoin. I don't think that Trump really used the power of the state to do that,
No.
or at least didn't ratchet it up.
Right.
But it was Biden Harris that really ratcheted up the pressure.
Yeah.
And this is a sordid story about corruption and money laundering that we can get into, but I want to pause because I've gone on a long time. I don't know if you have any questions on that.
Well, I mean, just you kind of covered this whole idea of that his view of Bitcoin evolved, and it's interesting to compare the different reasons. It would be interesting to compare the different reasons why President Obama would have had an issue or would have had a criticism of Bitcoin versus the reasons that Donald Trump would have. It's kind of like in in uh, with other issues here in Middle Tennessee, sometimes I find that I'm on the same side of an issue with somebody who is a Democrat. And it's because of the issue. We're on the same side of the issue, but for different reasons.
Mm,
So I'm thinking Obama would have viewed Bitcoin as a bit of a threat to centralized power
yeah.
versus Donald Trump is just thinking in terms of he's an American and he wants the dollar to be strong and not thinking of crypto as a threat per se. Does that make sense? Where he maybe perhaps just didn't understand the fullness of what it was capable of for the United States economy.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, Obama was and I don't remember the venue, right? But there's this famous clip where Bitcoiners love this clip. He was like, "We can't have Bitcoin because that allows you to carry around a Swiss bank account in your pocket." And everyone's like, "Wait a minute, that sounds good, right?" So,
Something
so
he would do, maybe?
Well, no, but yeah, exactly. But it's just it's a wonderful example because I love those kinds of moments
Yeah.
where the principles from which people reason are just
Hmm.
laid bare,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
like it's not just a spin of propaganda. He's really saying like your freedom to have a Swiss bank account
Yeah.
and what is a Swiss bank account? It's something that
Right.
is, well, nowadays less so, but the
Right.
idea of a Swiss bank account,
Yeah.
it's out of purview of authorities,
Right.
it's private, it's a
Right.
place where you can keep your wealth that without
Yep.
it having it confiscated or
Yep.
surveilled. And
Yep.
so he's like, we don't want Americans to be able to carry wealth in a way that's not confiscatable or surveilled or under
Exactly.
surveillance, right?
Exactly.
And
Hmm.
and he would agree with that. I don't think I'm demonizing what he's saying. I
No.
think he
Yeah.
honestly believes that that's a value. And so it's just a clash of values, a conflict of visions, right?
Yeah.
And and Trump is not opposed to the sort of sovereignty or the autonomy of the individual to the
Right.
extent that Obama is. And I think you're right. He just saw it
Yeah.
as sort of something that is an alternative that threatens to position the dollar. And at the time, it was sort of more accepted that the position of the US dollar is consistent. The support for the dollar is consistent with patriotism.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and now we've really come a long way since then.
Yes.
The past week has been extraordinary. You know that movie, that Woody Allen movie called like Sleeper, where he wakes up in the future. He's been frozen for like decades.
I haven't
And
seen it, but
it's
yeah.
pretty funny. He wakes up and part of the comedy of it is all of the conventional wisdom of his time has been flipped
Mhm.
on its head. So now
Yeah.
like all the doctors are like encouraging everyone to smoke because it's obviously good for you, right? But we've gone through like so much of that
Mhm.
now that now you
Yeah.
have um you have like for anybody that lived through the early 2000s and remembers the Bush is Hitler and Cheney
Oh,
is Hitler stuff.
oh yeah.
So like wake up now and be like the Democrat Party is in bed with the Cheneys and wants to like
I know.
promote war making.
I
It's
know.
like I know that it's obvious and everyone's been thinking this. I just
Yeah.
want to take a moment to recognize how insane that is, right? It really feels like we woke up in an alternative reality.
Yeah.
And part of the shift, this really fundamental shift in this, I guess you could say, political realignment,
Yeah.
is that the MAGA movement and conservatives in general, it is my hope that they're and I'm observing it, but I want to continue,
Right.
separate the idea that the US dollar is somehow necessary for American values to proliferate in the world and for American position to
Yeah.
be maintained. It's not. And in fact, the fact of the United States having what I call the Ring of Sauron,
Yeah.
right? Unlimited power to print money and give it to people
Yes.
that they choose.
Oh yeah.
That has been part of the bedrock of American power in the last few decades, but it's now caused so many distortions, political distortions, distortions in markets, both domestic and international,
Yeah.
um, and distortions in foreign policy, that it's now time to kind of re-examine
Yeah.
the cost benefit of that. Um, you know, you're fine to have the Ring of Sauron in possession of a benevolent dictator because they're benevolent, obviously, right?
Right.
But are dictators benevolent, or are they benevolent indefinitely? And then if that position is actually held, it's an office as instead of
Yeah.
a person, and it's going to be rotated. So if you give an office a certain amount of power, well, who's to say that the person that takes that office eventually will use that power for
Right.
something that is nefarious? And so
Right.
we're at that point now with the US with the money printer.
Right.
Um, the money printer was born in 1971 in the modern era.
Wow. See,
Before
that's news
that,
to me. I didn't even know that. I didn't know that.
yeah, so that happened. So after I hesitate to get into like a long history of it, but after World War II, there was this realization that we need to build an international system of finance
Yeah.
that could serve, a post-war world. And during World War One, after World War One, during World War II, there was a consistent flow of gold out of Europe and into the United States.
Yes.
Um, and the United States is geographically advantaged for sort of holding gold
Yeah.
securely in the sense that we're not bordered by, hostile states. We have a lot of geography of a very strong
Yeah.
military. So it wound up being the case that United States sort of accrued a lot of the gold holdings of Europe. And then during the Bretton Woods Conference, which took place in the 1940s, there were other alternatives considered, but the one that was agreed upon was that the United States would keep the gold and issue dollars against the gold, and then
Okay.
dollars would be used for international commerce.
Right.
Um, Now, eventually, it became illegal for Americans to own gold, but it was still, or it wasn't pegged $4 $2 in the United States. In other words, a
Right.
U.S. citizen couldn't take their dollars to a vault and ask
Right.
the U.S. government for gold, but international countries could,
Good.
right?
Yes.
So it was still functionally pegged to gold insofar as it served a purpose for
Right.
international trade.
Right.
Nixon took that away in
Yes.
1971 in this moment called Nixon shock. So
Yes.
1971 is where everything changed and
Yes.
the money printer became, I suppose, unmoored from any
Yeah.
check or balance.
Yeah. Yeah. It would have been. Yes. Because there's
And
nothing tangible
right.
associated with it anymore.
Well, right. And right. There's nothing, well, so there is something tangible, which is what they say is full faith and credit of the US government,
Mhm. Whatever that.
whatever that means. Well, what it means is something very specific.
Right.
So what people will say, who defend this system, is they'll say, well, it's based on the ability of the United States government to extract taxes from its
Mm.
economic participants,
Yeah.
right? How do you extract taxes? They're not voluntary, they're
No, you
coercive.
compel them. Yeah.
You compel them, and what do you suppose happens if you don't pay your taxes? Like over and over again,
You go to,
forever.
right, you go to
You will be
jail.
put in a cage, and
Yeah.
if you refuse to go into the cage, you'll be killed. So so what it means is that our entire system of fiat currency, the US dollar, is based on the ability of the United States government to
Yeah.
violently coerce Americans um,
Service.
into giving
Just
up their property to the
right.
government.
Right.
So so that's kind of the where what it boils down to. And I think, like I said, when in 1971 we were more culturally, I suppose, homogenous and
Yeah.
maybe more. I mean, I wasn't alive back then, but when I watch old movies or old news shows, I'm amazed that we can have these, people would have these like really intense debates
Oh
and they
yeah.
would have really conflicting worldviews and
Yeah.
they would like really so much. And then at the end, they'd be like, but we're all Americans and we have like
Yeah.
so much in common, right?
Yeah.
There's this idea that at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
we all agree on first principles. And I think that has gone away.
Yes.
And so Nixon giving the United States government the Ring of Sauron in that moment maybe didn't seem so bad at the time because nobody could really see so
Yeah.
far in the future, or they didn't care. They were like, well, maybe
We
in
won't be
50 years.
around if it, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe in 50 years it'll matter. But for now, we're like aligned enough that we can trust these people. Like
Yeah.
we can, and and maybe they were right, and maybe it ran its course. And now there's just become sort of intolerable. There's been so many abuses and usurpations
Yeah.
that we no longer believe that it's appropriate to confer that much power on these unelected bureaucrats, and it
Yes.
needs to stop.
So then you would say, in light of all of that, conversation we just had, so then it's very reasonable to then look at the treatment of crypto over the last 10 or so years and understand the level of animosity and hostility that our government has for it because it's an alternative. It's a very, very viable potential alternative for people to be able to utilize that from a fiat currency, which we currently utilize, and they can't take it from you. They can't control it from any place. I've said to people over and over again, ever since COVID, and all of the issues with, in some states, they aren't even they've passed laws not to put gas stoves in new houses in I mean, they want us to have a life where they can flip a switch and just turn it all off if we don't comply in
Mhm.
every way. A social credit system, we've all talked about that. So, I mean, I guess if I'm one of those people and that's my goal, I would see something like crypto as a definite real threat because you've got an alternative someplace else to go and they can't control you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's layers to this. I think like if you want to dial up the anxiety to the very extreme, you could say that we are all, like I was saying before, like we're compelled to participate in this system under threat of violence. And
Right.
Bitcoin really does allow the individual to opt out, at least to the extent that they're willing to take certain steps. Like, for example, um, there's this concept of jurisdictional arbitrage. In other words, sure, the United States government could eventually ban Bitcoin or tax it to death,
Mhm.
but you will see Bitcoin wealth exit the country, and
Yeah.
other countries will be incentivized to say,
Yeah.
"Come over here,
Yeah.
live here, and we won't do that to you." And so there's sort of like almost like a Laffer curve with that. There's like a limit to how much they can do there without
Right.
undermining the thing they're trying to do.
Right.
Um, the and the Bitcoin is everywhere. It's
Yeah.
distributed throughout the entire planet, and so it's redundant up to millions and millions of times. So In other words, you can access Bitcoin, which is accounted to you out on the Bitcoin network all over the planet. You can quote unquote take it. You're not really taking it. What you're doing is taking access to that amount of Bitcoin on the Bitcoin ledger. You can take that across the border by
Yeah.
simply memorizing a password in your head.
Yeah.
You can just memorize a secret, and that secret will give you access to millions or billions of dollars wherever you wind up landing.
Yeah.
So there's really no way for them to, again, they can coerce you if you are a rule follower, but there
Right.
are enough people, I think, that wouldn't do that, that it sort
Yeah.
of undermines their ability to control it in that way. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the apocalyptic, like individual, like,
Yeah.
it's a sovereign individual type of reason that
Yeah.
it's sort of it is disliked by people in power. But even if you kind of dial back and just look at its effect on monetary policy,
Right.
right? So the fact that the United States government and the Federal Reserve can set monetary policy, what that means is that they set the price of money. So,
Mm-hmm.
we all like to be like, oh, Harris, she wants to
Mm-hmm.
institute price controls. Price
Yeah.
controls don't work. We all know they don't work. Well, guess what? We all have price controls of the one thing at the very, very top, the price that trickles down to everything else is the price of money. That
Money.
is not set by the market. That's set by the Federal Reserve, and and that is the price control to end all price controls. And they can't do that with Bitcoin because they can't
Right.
print it. So because Bitcoin is a naturally scarce asset that cannot be counterfeited
Right.
and cannot be printed, they lose control of monetary policy. And so what you see is, for example, with all scarce assets, but Bitcoin I think is the most scarce asset, even more scarce than gold. But what you see is when you have uh, money printing, runaway money printing, like what we had during COVID,
Right.
that money, you have all this cash airdrop to you, so you start spending it,
Yep.
and people, people who were maybe less financially savvy
Mm.
would spend it on consumption or all consumption,
Yeah.
but a lot of people were buying assets.
Yes.
They're buying. That's why we had, and we had some silly things like GameStop, which I don't
Yes.
know, pretty
Yeah.
amazing. Then
Yeah. That
we had
was.
like, yeah, we had the Bitcoin bull run. We had everything,
Yeah.
It was the everything bubble. And so the more they try to control monetary policy of the dollar, the more they print money, the more Bitcoin accrues that money. So you can think of it as sort of like a black hole of capital. It will just keep sucking in all the dollars that they print,
Right.
so that the dollars, instead of being used in the economy in the way that they used to be intended to be used when they would print money and inject liquidity into the economy, all they're doing is moving the center of gravity from the dollar over to Bitcoin. And
Wow.
so that's terrifying for them, right? They
Yes.
can't.
Absolutely terrifying
Yeah,
for them. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think we've seen over the last several years the Bitcoin adoption continuing to grow. According to that article that you contributed, an estimated 26% of Americans now owning it. So, do you see a potential in light of all we've discussed, a
Mm.
potential Trump policy shift impacting everyday Bitcoin users and its role in mainstream commerce, everyday stuff?
Absolutely. There's this thing that has gone on under the Biden-Harris administration called Operation Choke Point 2.0. Okay, it's
Uh-huh.
kind of a funny name, but that's because Obama did Operation Choke Point 1.0, it had an official name. Choke
Yeah.
Point 2.0, it's not an official name, but it's just what people in the finance industry call
Right.
it, just because it's the obvious like spiritual successor.
Yeah.
And what they did was they attacked any financial institution handling dollars that also touched crypto or Bitcoin, because of this black hole of capital, this sucking of capital over to
Right.
the Bitcoin. They realized that what we can do is just attack the transit,
Right.
the
The
transit point,
conduit. Yeah.
the conduit.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did, and they even the Silvergate bankruptcy, turns out in retrospect there was some investigative reporting that that uncovered the fact that Silvergate was not insolvent at that time, and
Wow.
and there's a really fantastic article which was in the Forbes article
Yep.
that you mentioned that goes into details there. So it was a very nefarious type of an activity that the Biden-Harris administration was engaged in. And you also have Gary Gensler, who's been attacking people, attacking companies and people um, for violations of SEC regulations,
Yeah.
but he hasn't provided guidance as to what they should do. There's all these
Right.
companies, all these people saying, "I want to go through the front door. Tell me what the regulations are so I
Right.
can abide by them." But he
Yeah.
has actually a stated policy of regulation by enforcement. So you're going to find out what the law is
Right.
when I come and arrest you, and you
Right.
learn where the boundary was
Yeah.
that way. It was just
Yeah.
incredibly un-American and
Yeah.
infuriating,
Yeah.
frankly.
You won't know how big the landmine is until you step on it.
Yeah. And so at the Bitcoin conference, so Trump, got an enormous response when he announced that he would be firing Gary Gensler. There was such a response from the crowd that he was like, "Wow, I didn't know how much you guys couldn't stand this guy." And he's like, "Let me say that again. I'm going to fire Gary Gensler."
That sounds
Whole
like
crowd
something
goes
he
in.
would say. That sounds
Yeah.
like him.
So if we get new leadership in the SEC, and we end Operation Choke Point, and we allow banks to begin to engage with this industry, then you're going to see a tremendous uptick in investment for the startups and even established companies, and offering financial services that combine dollars and Bitcoin. And that's what we need to take this next
Yeah.
step. People need that conduit. So that's one thing that I'm hopeful that under the Trump administration that we'll see. And I think it's a very high probability that happens at this point, 80, 90%.
Yeah.
Not that Trump wins, but that if he wins, that we get to see that benefit.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
but another,
that would allay a lot of the fears from the fear porn people that are like, there's going to be a run on the banks. There's going to be a run on the banks. There's going to be a run on the banks. And you're hearkened back to those days during the when the depression, just prior to the depression, when the stock market crashed, and all of those, 1929, even 1987, freaking people out. If you have something of a safety net to sort of shore up, there's not just one thing
Mhm.
be reliant on. We've got other streams somewhere else where we don't have to be fearful of losing all of our money that's sitting in the bank.
That's right. Actually, like, Bitcoin is not correlated, not consistently correlated with pretty much anything else. So
Right.
what that means is sometimes it's correlated with equities. Sometimes it's correlated with gold, which is typically not correlated with equities. So in other words, Bitcoin sometimes behaves as a risk-on asset. And when everything's going up, that's risky. So is Bitcoin. Other times you see a risk off kind of behavior where people seem to be selling higher risk assets and moving money into Bitcoin. So it's a weird in that way. But
Right.
when you're building a portfolio, that's actually a very valuable thing to have, something that's not correlated with other
Right.
things. That's what you're always that's what diversification actually means. It doesn't just
Means.
mean owning a bunch of different stuff.
Right.
It means owning stuff in buckets that are not correlated to each other. So it
Right.
does offer that value. Absolutely. Um, I guess I would just add to in the Trump administration, and the article that you mentioned
Right.
talks about this, is the concept of Bitcoin moving from something that is pretty much used. It is money, but it's used mostly as a store of value today. And if it were to become something that was a medium of exchange,
Right.
meaning it's used more in a widespread fashion by merchants and businesses for payments, you would see a tremendous benefit, because then you could really, instead of, again, selling your Bitcoin for dollars when you have liabilities that are priced in fiat, you could now try to engineer your life so that you have liabilities priced in Bitcoin, and you work with merchants and other people that accept it. And then you can really have a parallel economy
Right.
start to develop around it.
Right.
And the way in that could happen is this concept of eliminating capital gains from Bitcoin transactions under certain
Yeah.
amounts.
Yes.
So today, like, it's funny because some Bitcoiners don't know this. If you go and you do buy a coffee or a t-shirt from somebody who accepts Bitcoin, which there are many that do. In fact, there's
Right.
maps of cities which will show you where you can spend your Bitcoin. That's a taxable event. Like you could spend $5 worth of Bitcoin on a coffee,
Yeah.
and you will have to do complicated math come tax season to figure out
Ugh.
which of your Bitcoin, like what price did you
Yeah.
buy that Bitcoin at?
Right.
Is that
And
Bitcoin, has it appreciated or depreciated? And then
yeah.
what's the capital gain or loss? That whole thing has to happen for every single transaction. So nobody will,
No.
people don't use it.
Right.
Um, but if we, but Cynthia, Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming and Kristen Gillibrand of New York, they had this bill a couple of years ago to try to promote Bitcoin adoption, and part of it was a de minimis tax, an amount that you were able to spend in Bitcoin without it being a taxable event. And I think it was like $600. I would like to see that go up to like $2,000,
Okay. Yeah.
1,000 at least.
Yeah.
But that would make a tremendous difference as well, and really drive this concept of using Bitcoin day to day as a medium of exchange.
Yeah. So, so of course, because we live in the United States, then regulatorily speaking, if that's a word, are we going to have to see the states adopt certain types of laws in order for us to be able to utilize that as far as just for everyday commerce? I know the federal law is one thing, but every state's got its own commerce laws as well. And I know a lot of states are beginning to adopt some of those regulatory changes. So what does that look like? And would that present too much of a bit of an obstacle? I mean, are we further along with the federal law than we are in the states?
That's a good question. There's been several states that have passed kind of Bitcoin rights laws in the past couple of years. And there's a nonprofit called Satoshi Action Fund that's really spearheading that work. And they're getting bills drafted and getting them passed in houses of state legislatures.
Okay.
And it really just, I don't know how much bite they really have, but they
Right.
just lay the groundwork expectation to say, like, as a
Right.
citizen of this state, I have the right to mine Bitcoin, I have the right to own Bitcoin, I have the right to use Bitcoin, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Now, if the question is sort of more like, I mean, you and me, like if we decide,
Right.
if I'm like, I'm going to give you this coffee cup and you're going to give me a lamp, like that's
Yeah.
a transaction, and
Yeah.
technically that's even a taxable event depending on the de minimis rules. But there's really no central authority that tells you you can or can't use something as a
Means of
instrument
exchange.
of trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think you really need anything there. If the question is about like legal tender,
Okay.
well, legal tender would mean that you must accept Bitcoin
Right.
for all debts, public and private, right?
Right.
So you don't need that to make it a voluntary exchange.
Okay. So basically, any vendor or store that chose to accept it as a form of payment would have the ability to do so without any major legislation having to be passed.
There's no actually that's possible today. Actually, there's a great company. I know some of the guys there at Zaprite,
Okay.
Zaprite.
Mm-hmm.
I don't work with them, but they're cool, and they created a merchant solution where, as a merchant, you get sort of like the Square experience on an
Yeah.
iPad,
Yeah.
and you can accept Bitcoin or dollars, and
Yeah.
you can decide on the back end how much Bitcoin and how much dollars you want to keep. It'll automatically convert for you all
Nice.
the dollars if that's what you prefer, or if you want to
Yeah.
save all your revenue in Bitcoin, you can do that. So that exists today. It's just that it's too hard to use for two reasons. One is the taxation problem, and
Yeah.
the second one is the banks being attacked for working with Bitcoin causes you to have fewer options when you go to set up a business banking account. If you hold Bitcoin on your balance sheet, or if you work with Bitcoin transactionally, it just depends on the risk tolerance of the bank and whether that's something they want to work with. But it's really not standard. Like some banks
Right.
will say no to that. So it's just like it's sort of there's this concept of over compliance too
Yeah.
in finance, which is really important for people to understand. So, and this goes back to sort of the regulation by enforcement too. Overcompliance is the idea that companies, it's like they don't want trouble. They don't want to have
Right.
to deal with
Right.
lawsuits and enforcement action. So
Right.
they look at sort of the behaviors and this public statements of public officials, and they're like, I'm not going to just follow the letter of the law. I'm going to follow the gist of what these people are telling me. And the
Right.
gist is don't touch this stuff.
Yeah.
And so just to sort of like, I just don't have to take on that risk. It's not enough
Right.
upside for me to take on that risk. So I'm just going to say no.
Right. It's not
So
worth
that's
the
what they've
headache.
achieved with Operation Choke Point. They've
Yeah.
basically, we talk about like free speech, the freezing of free speech when the
Yes.
government just attacks one or two people. It's the exact same thing. But CFOs and compliance officers are so risk averse that they're just like they will take risks if there's enough upside. But if
Yeah.
it's just like, oh, like there's this merchant and I could get one more depositor at my bank, but like they're using Bitcoin,
Right.
maybe I just pass on it.
Right.
So
So it sounds like then with Trump being amenable to Bitcoin and those types of, cryptocurrencies, we know in his first term, he talked about how the regulations were the big thing for him. For every one that he put in place, he slashed two.
mhm.
So it sounds to me like he would have the ability, without having to even involve Congress, to be able to loosen up a lot of that regulation, and just essentially, even some of those things could maybe even be done away with an executive order, possibly, and allow the banking industry to sort of handle it in a way that's more free flowing, perhaps less fussy, or like you were saying, I don't yeah, they use Bitcoin. So I think we're just going to stay away from them, where then it, of course, then removes that chill from those people who work in the bank, and the bank regulators aren't going to come after you because you're dealing with Bitcoin. So is that kind of where we're thinking he may go, should he be, reelected?
Yeah, I mean, I think executive orders, I haven't really thought about what he could do with executive orders. That's a very, very good question. Like, how much do you need Congress? How much is it like the Trump administration drafting laws and then having Congress pass them versus executive orders? I do think, though, that the sort of another strategy is just changing personnel at some
Yeah,
of these regulatory agencies like
yeah,
SEC, maybe others. And, like you said, if it's sort of just a loosening of regulation
yeah,
and a change of leadership, that may do more than enough to unlock this sort of next era.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else that, because I know people are feeling anxious, I mean, in my day job, because the economy has just been so poor for the last 4 years. People are really struggling, and now I even know people who are waiting to buy a car. They're waiting to do lots of things until they see who gets elected. So do you think that it is hopeful that, because I know people remember Trump's first economy and it was so great. We've since, not only did they turn that ship completely around, but we're now in a hole that we weren't nowhere near, at the bottom of, in his first term.
Yeah.
So, what do you foresee? Should he be reelected? What type of turnaround could we expect, possibly, and how quickly do you think that could come about, and when could we start to really sort of see the fruits of the different regulatory endeavors that he would embark on once he's elected?
Well, so I mean, I hope that he's elected because I think that it's going to be better for Americans.
Yeah.
However, just to be clear, I actually think that if Harris is elected, it will still be incrementally better than it is today. So we
Okay.
can take some kind of respite there. Um, I don't think Harris has the ability to continue choke point the way that she has. There's too much momentum now to end that and to really work with the industry. And you can see that all, I mean, again, campaign promises are worth nothing, right?
Right.
But you've seen that she sees that she's politically vulnerable
Yeah.
as somebody who's attacking crypto, and so she's changed her tune. And you had like Elizabeth Warren's anti-crypto army that's now like
Yeah.
out. Like that's not politically viable. That doesn't help her or
Right.
anyone else. So at least there's going to be an incremental improvement. Trump, it would be more like the beginning of a golden age, I think.
Okay.
So we definitely would prefer that much upside. I mean, how long will it take? I'm actually fairly optimistic. I think even Democrats would it would be sort of like the 90s where they are riding this incredible boom that is
Right.
generated by technological advances.
Yeah.
The three technological advances that are really key to understanding this next golden age are AI,
Yes.
Bitcoin, and nuclear power.
Yes.
The combination of those three things are incredibly powerful, and they're interdependent. And
Yes.
there's so many advances across all three of them that I really don't know that it will be stopped. I think we're going into a dramatic increase in productivity and wealth in the United States either way. But the Democrats would try to kind of extract as much as possible from
Right.
that
Right.
because they would kind of see it as an opportunity to siphon.
Right.
And I think the Republican Party, where it is today, is they're just going to try to maximize the advantage there and then maybe monetize it later.
Yeah.
So so I'm not one of these doomers. I'm actually fairly optimistic
Yeah.
either way. I think that for all the problems with surveillance and
Mhm.
violation of civil liberties that we've seen over the last really, I mean, even since Obama's time,
Right.
I think that people are awake to it and also learning how to use technology to protect themselves.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to learn how encryption actually works. Don't just, you know, like some of this stuff is insane. Like Tucker Carlson saying that Telegram is better than Signal or whatever. Like learn encryption,
Yeah.
learn which apps to use, learn how to protect your data, learn how to protect your money with Bitcoin, which is an encrypted form of sovereign money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as an individual, you're going to need to learn some technical tools in order to protect yourself.
Yeah.
As a society, we're going into a time when we're going to see an absolute explosion of productivity and wealth. And so I'm really, really excited to see where this goes.
That's great. Well, and speaking of learning all of those things, let's talk about your upcoming Wealth Summit. So tell
Sure.
everybody about that. And I've already sent out, and I'll have it. The link will be posted with this interview so that people can sign up. But tell people what you're going to be talking about and teaching them.
Yeah, sure. So this is an event that I'm helping organize, participating in. I didn't conceive of it. It's actually a follow-on event to something that has happened on a smaller scale in the past. And this is on November 13th. It's at 5 p.m. The location is still not determined, but it's probably going to be in Brentwood now
Okay.
and I can't say where yet because
Mhm.
we're not finalized, but it's
Sure.
probably going to be in Brentwood. And it's going to be a panel of people discussing post-election, what we can expect for the economy. And I'll be talking about Bitcoin mostly. There will be people there who are experts in real estate, commercial
Okay.
lending, family office, banking, and I think that's about it. So it's just like a people from different disciplines who are kind of explaining what they see down the pike. And again, that's regardless of who wins the election.
That's
I think we all
good.
need to understand like,
Right.
what to expect. And so we'll be scrambling after we find out. Hopefully we know by
Yeah.
November 13th. We may
Yeah.
not, but if we do, then we'll be scrambling to kind of get our act together and try to kind of like explain what we imagine will happen. So.
Right. Right.
And yeah, I would say the URL, right? But it's going to be linked. It's wealthsummit.carrd.co. I think it's easier to just use the link
Yeah.
in the show notes and go register there. It's gonna be cool. There's gonna be some like refreshments and stuff, so it should be a really
Okay.
fun time.
Great. Yeah, no, I know my husband and I would be interested in knowing all of those things because there's this anxiety. And I think just having an understanding of perhaps what the landscape will look like either way and how then to pivot or if you have to divert, say you just have to relax, great. But if you have to divert or pivot in some way, especially as close as we are to retirement age in our 50s, it's just, I remember seeing all of those people what was it, 10 years ago or so, lose all of their money in their 401ks when they just
Mm.
had all of it in the stock market. The conventional wisdom is not something that is as useful anymore as it once was. So
Mhm.
having more information on the new changes that are coming would be very, very, very valuable to people I know. So in closing, is there anything that you want the viewers to know that we didn't really cover, but you feel is really important for them to keep in mind?
Well, I just think that I just want to iterate here that I don't like I work for a Bitcoin startup and our mission is to help people acquire Bitcoin. I do that because I am passionate about the social mission of Bitcoin. And I just want to sort of lay to rest any idea that I'm here like selling Bitcoin. I think that it's extremely important for people to understand it for themselves and decide whether they want to hold it. It's hard to understand because it's a
Yeah.
new form of money. And so you need to stick with it. And I'm here for that. Like, that's why I'm doing this podcast. And that's why I love doing these types of things.
Yeah.
Um, if you have questions about this, reach out to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if you, but you shouldn't trust anyone, but I can just tell you that I have sent people to other companies to buy Bitcoin than my own because it was
Okay.
better for what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm very neutral about that because I think that if we can get this thing to happen,
Yeah.
everybody benefits. And so I'm taking a very long view. I
Yes.
have no interest in trying to convince anybody to, come with me and I'm going to make
Right.
all the fees from this. So because it can get weird, right? You can go to
Yeah.
these sorts of investment things and you wind up buying a
Right.
timeshare at the end, right? That's not what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's really just about information
Yeah.
and we're going to keep it at that level. So, but if
Yeah.
you do have questions, I love educating. I love writing about this stuff. It's really
Yeah.
my passion. So I'm very happy to help anyone out who has questions.
Well, and so then where can we find you? Like what are your socials, website, what's all that information? And I'll be sure to link that, of course, in the article in the post when I release the interview.
Yeah, so my website is davebirnbaum.com. Pretty easily. And my I'm usually on X. My X account is contrary and then MO.
Hmm.
Those are the two best places to find me.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Dave. This has been an incredibly informative conversation. I learned several things today that I didn't know. Not that I felt like I was a monetary expert, but as a as a person who studies history, I felt like I had a pretty good grasp, but I feel like I've learned several things today, and I know that our viewers will feel the same way too. So thank you so much again for spending a little time on your Saturday, beautiful Saturday morning,
Yeah,
chatting with us. And I hope we can do this again because there's going to be a whole lot to talk about, I think, after November 5th.
I agree. Anytime. Thank you, Kelly. I
Okay.
really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Dave. Oh, and for anybody who's watching this, please be sure to like and subscribe and share this interview and any others that you will find on my channel that you find informative and useful. Thank you so much, everybody.